Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me, everyone? Can you all hear me, everyone? Okay, thank you, Wen. Thank you, Yan Zichi. My apologies. Yeah, I'm a little bit late because I had some difficulty getting in, but managed to get in finally. Uh, so let me introduce myself first. I do not know the reason why I couldn't get in earlier, but I hope it doesn't happen again. But I'll sort it out. If I'm a little bit late, just bear with me. Usually it's because of a technical problem, but managed to get in. So what I'll do right now is I'll just introduce myself, and then I'll flash. Let me just share the screen with you here. So what I have here. Okay, I think a lot of the things I wanted to share has kind of disappeared when I restarted the computer. So I restarted the computer, and let me bring up all the things I wanted to share with you. So give me a minute. Okay. So most of these things I have uploaded onto your Brightspace, so you should have it. So this is one of them, and I'll just show it to you. So these are the slides I've uploaded onto Brightspace, and I'll share that with you in a moment. Let me just pull out all the documents that I wanted to share with you. Okay. Okay, this is a lecture we're going to conduct, and this is on Brightspace. So I hope all of you can see this, or you have looked at this before. All right, at least you may have looked at it over the weekend, and it's there. So we are going to talk about leadership. The other thing I like to do, at least today, is I will start talking about leadership in general, and then I'll start writing my thoughts down about what I think about leadership. So whatever I write on the screen, I will upload all those documents onto your Brightspace. So you have access to my ideas, my thoughts, what I think about leadership in change management. So I hope it doesn't end up being a one-way street, meaning that I do all the talking and you do all the listening. So I hope you will ask me questions, and I will give you opportunities for you to ask me questions. And every time I finish a topic, maybe an area that I want to talk about, and then before I move on to the next section, I will explain to you. Okay, does anyone have any questions for this? What I have covered. And you can type your questions in the chat bubble. And that's usually how I communicate with students. I know this is a big class, so let's adopt some protocol in the sense that, if I say, do you have any questions, type the questions. But if you think your question is pretty long and you would like to turn on the mic and talk to me, I'm also open to that. If your question is a very long question. There are about 66 students. So let's adopt some protocol. If everyone starts typing in questions, asking questions, there might be a little bit of a problem. I may get a little bit distracted. So what I generally do is I do not read from the slides. The slides are available to you. You can't see the PowerPoint on Brightspace. Okay. Well, if you can't see the PowerPoint on Brightspace, then I would suggest, write to Kaplan and ask them whether they can send you copies of it. I would suggest write to Kaplan, your program manager. They would have copies of this slides. If they don't have it, I can always send it to them. So instead of me sending slides to each one of you, just have one contact point. So those who cannot see the slides on Brightspace, just write to Kaplan. And if they don't have my slides, I will just I'll send it to them and they can send to all of you. But all the slides are posted on Brightspace. Okay, so any document that I type, I will post it on Brightspace. If you don't have it, just let Kaplan know and I'll send it to them. Okay, everyone, that's how we would go about doing this lesson. All right, okay, I don't think I've introduced myself. My name is Morgan. Yeah, most people in Kaplan and most people in UCD know me as Morgan or Mr. Morgan. And I've been teaching this subject for a very long time. And for some reason, UCD and Kaplan keep inviting me to teach this subject, mostly because, not because I'm an expert in change management, but I do change management in real life. I go into companies and make changes. Not as a consultant, I actually implement changes. But most of those changes that I implement in companies tend to be related to technology changes. I implement systems, but in the process of implementing systems, you will get resistance, from the employees or people working in that company. And part of my job is to ensure that they accept that change, that the change is not meant to harm them or adversely affect their job in the company. So maybe for that reason, they keep calling me back. So I've worked with a lot of lecturers, but a lot of the materials I'm using goes back to, one great lecturer that I worked with in UCD. His name is Paul McGrath. Okay. Okay, Hong, it's good to see you too. Okay. So a lot of these things I've learned from him. So UCD lecturers can also be of great benefit because they have access to academia and they have given me a lot of this information, which I'm using for the lectures. Now, these lectures that I'm giving you, I have two focus. One focus is to prepare you for the exams. So everything that I'm teaching you, and I will discuss this at the end of the module, the last lesson, on what are the areas that you are expected to know. But most of the things I talk about, you will be tested. You will be tested in the exam. So it is not a surprise. The other thing is slightly different in the sense that your assignment. The assignment, your UCD lecturer, I think Rosa Chun, I think her name. I've never worked with her before. First time I'm dealing with her or working with her. She has given you case studies, I understand. And you're supposed to do the case study. I just got the case studies. I haven't looked at it yet, but I will look at the case studies, just a brief overview of the case studies tonight. And then tomorrow I may have questions for you. Basically, what did Rosa ask you to do? And if she hasn't told you anything, I will give you instructions on how to tackle the case study. So did your UCD lecturer tell you anything about the case study, how to approach it? Anyone? Hong? Anybody else? Did the UCD lecturer give you any information on how to tackle the case study? Anyone wants to give me any feedback on that? Not really? Okay, in that case, I'll spend some time, not today, but I'll plan. I know there are 3 case studies that were given to you. So what I'll do is I'll look at those 3 case studies and then I'll try to explain. I think you are allowed to work in groups, I understand. And I think your groups are allowed to choose, I think, any case study. So I will talk about it again in the last lesson, okay? Because I thought this was discussed, but never mind, I can do it myself. Okay, the BST is group assignment. I do not know. I do not know what are the instructions she gave you. Can you choose? Am I ask you, or the BST is the one you're supposed to do? I can check with her. I can write to her and then ask her, what assignment are you asked to do? Okay, I'll check with her then. If the BST is a group assignment, I'll check with her and then I'll focus my discussion on the assignment on BST or BTS. I think it's a Korean pop group, right? I think so. Okay, I don't follow those groups. Yeah, it's BTS, I think. It's a Korean pop group. I think they have kind of disbanded recently. All right, so let me check with her, which is let me write it down. So let me just make a note of that. Okay, I'm just writing it down so that I don't forget. On a daily basis, I've got a lot of things to do. So this is one of the things I'll take care of it tonight. All right, let's get started. The slides, you can read it yourself. I won't read from the slides. That's easy to do. You can read it. What I'm going to do is I will share with you this document. And the purpose of this document is more to, my thoughts. When I talk about anything, I like to have my thoughts on paper. When I talk to my client, when I talk to a class, except when I talk to my wife, I can't have the paper in front of me. She thinks I might be creating a contract. But most of the time when I talk to students, when I'm telling you something, I like to have a set of notes. I'll write in point form, but it is about the topic at hand. And the topic at hand is about the role of leadership, the role of leadership in change management, as the slides will point out. I am developing more than what is in the slides. So it is important that you listen. You listen, follow, and ask me questions. Now, let me ask you a very simple question. And I will type the question in the chat box. Who do you think is a good leader? No right or wrong answer. Who do you think is a good leader? Anyone has any ideas? Anyone wants to give me some input on this? Who do you think is a good leader? Anyone? No one knows a good leader? You think all people, Chairman Mao, Obama, okay, fine. Anybody else? Musk, okay, Trump, okay, Musk again, Steve Jobs. Okay, so there are a few answers. Now the more difficult question. Why do you think that person is a good leader? So you've chosen Steve Jobs, you've chosen Musk, you've chosen Chairman Mao, Trump, all these people, Obama. Why do you think that person is a good leader? Because he leads the company very well, okay? How the company performs is not because of one person, it is because of collective effort. But how do you get people to work together? A lot of you are talking about organizations, okay? But if you lead an organization to success, how do you motivate? How do you inspire people? Okay, someone, Zhang Wenyu, talks about gaining the trust and recognition of your colleagues. But how do you do that? How do you get your colleagues to recognize you? And what do you mean by recognition? Because you're successful, they are good leaders? Well, they could be self-centered. Some of the richest men in history, they are very selfish. They think about themselves. They think about making lots of money. I was watching a movie last night, a late night movie with my wife. And these two guys were asking this character, why did you help us? And he says, I want to make more money. That was the answer. That doesn't mean he cared about the company. He just cared about making lots of money, right? Well, if you share the common value of the majority, does that make you a good leader? A leader always stands apart. Maybe the values may be different, but he inspires the people he's working with. All right. So I hear successful, I hear profitability of companies, success, passionate about your work. I'm never passionate about my work, but I make sure that whatever I do it well. I'm more passionate about my family. It's something I do for a living. But can you be passionate about your work? Something which is inanimate, doesn't do anything for you. When you're about 40, 50, or even 60 years old, you wonder, why did I do that? Knowledgeable. Well, do you have to be knowledgeable in all these different fields to succeed? Judgment, decision making. So you have, if I go through your list, I see a lot of information about contribution, profitability, success. But before we explore, and this is what we are going to do in our lesson this afternoon, we will explore the role of leadership in change management. And then at the end, how does it apply to change management? First, I'll talk about leadership. I'll talk about what I might call a definition of leadership. So I'm typing out a definition of leadership. What makes a good leader? Leadership, whenever we talk about leadership involves the use of influence. You influence someone to change. You influence someone to succeed. If you can influence, if your mother can influence you to succeed, to do well, she's got leadership. That's what leadership is all about. But if a person orders you, this is what you have to do. If you don't do it, I'm going to beat you up. That's not a leader. That's a dictator. So you can find leadership in all relationships. All relationships involve leadership if you can influence that person. If you can influence me to do something on my own accord, you have leadership. You don't have to be in a senior position, but those are the ones which are highly visible to us. To be a leader, anyone can be a leader if you can influence. But because of this, what becomes important is the communication process. So this stresses the importance of the communication process. If you're a great communicator, and Mr. Obama, I agree, was a great communicator. You listen to his speeches, he can inspire you. There are not many people who can speak well. Joe Biden is a terrible communicator. He tends to repeat things over and over again. But Obama was a great communicator. So communication process is important because the clarity and accuracy of communication affect the behavior and performance of followers. If you're not clear, if you can't speak well, that will hold you back from leadership. If you can't write well, because writing is also a form of communication. If you cannot write well and if you cannot speak well, you would be left behind. You would not be considered a great leader. Most great leaders, especially in change management, when you see that, they are good leaders. They can convince others this is what you have to do to perform. Which brings us to the last point. Usually we see the end result, and the end result is the accomplishment of goals. Right? This is the end result, and this is what you see. So when someone achieves a certain goal or objective, and a lot of you looked from the perspective of organizations and you say the company succeeded. Maybe you look at its profitability, its sales. But how is that achieved? That is the end result. But the leader has to do influence. He has to influence those people who are following him. That's one. He has to communicate. So communication is also important. But at the end, you achieve this. You can also accomplish goals through dictatorships. This is what you have to do. If you don't, I'll send you to prison. I'll kill you. Stalin did that. He accomplished certain goals in his lifetime. But did he influence? Did he communicate? No, he did not. So that's the difference between dictators and leaders. Leaders do not impose on you. They influence you. So that's the difference. So understand the meaning of that. What is leadership? So why are we looking at leaders? Leaders are change agents. So leaders are change agents. Let me make that statement. Leaders are change agents. If everything is well, we don't need leaders. We just carry on whatever that we are doing. All right, so leaders are change agents. So what I'm going to do to illustrate how they make a change, why we call some people leaders, we are going to look at why they deserve to be called leaders. And I'm going to give some examples. So I'll tell you what the theory says, and then I'll give you an example of what I have seen and what this leader has done. And then you can make a comparison. So leaders are change agents. They change how things are done. They change a country. They change a business. Okay? So let's look at change agents or leaders as change agents. So one of the things that leaders have to do is they have to recognize the need for change. And this is what your book, your slides, what they call sense making. Sense making, making sense of the change. And I know most of you are coming from China. When I see when I see the participants, I think most of you are from China. I think there are a few students from Vietnam. Now, one of the leaders that I admire from China is Deng Xiaoping. Up to that point, up to that point in his life when he took over. And mind you, Deng Xiaoping was not the anointed leader by Mao Zedong. When Mao Zedong died in 1976, he appointed Hua Guofen. I don't even hear about him anymore. I think he passed away a few years ago. He appointed Hua Guofen in 1978. But what Deng Xiaoping did was he outmaneuvered Huang Guofen. He inherited a country with a lot of social conflict, disenchantment with the Communist Party. There was a lot of institutional disorder. You may have heard of the Gang of Four. I was a very young man. I was a teenager, secondary school. But I saw all this. I read about it. But he made to change all these chaotic policies from the Mao era and decided that the country needs to change. Now, for me, that is a great leader. Can you take a country like China, 1 billion people, convince them that this is the way to do it? That is incredible, you know. I don't think of, if you think about this, that takes a lot of courage. You can imagine the enemies he must have had, but he had the courage of his convictions to say, this is what we will do. This is what we must do. And he made it happen. That's Deng Xiaoping. And I admire him for those reasons. Okay, recognizing the need for change. That is sense making. Okay, so sense making is one of the things that the leader must be able to do. If you think there is a change that needs to be done, you have to create a certain sense in people. Look, people, this is what we have to do. And great leaders are capable of doing that. Knock some common sense in them, telling them this is what we must do. Okay? Anyone has any questions before I go on to the next leader? I'm going to talk about a few leaders, but anyone has any questions so far? Anyone has got anything to add? No. All right. So what I'm going to talk about will take us up to maybe the break time, and we will have a break maybe around 4:30 or so, maybe about 20 minutes. And then when we come back, we will continue. And it will then conveniently lead to what qualities a change agent in a company must have. Because our focus, of course, I never know, maybe some of you would grow and do other things, maybe in politics, but most of us would end up in companies, and we need to know what a change agent does in a company. And that's what our focus is. That's what the focus of the module is. But we have to learn from these leaders. So that is sense making. Another thing that a leader must do is formulate a vision of a better future based on understanding of the current situation. So things could be dire, things could be bad right now, but you're giving the people, your employees, hope that the future would be brighter, the future would be better. This is what is known as creating a vision, what the book calls visioning. Do you have that capability? Can you envision what the future is going to be? When the Soviets, before Russia, it was known as the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republics. Before Russia, the Soviets, they launched Sputnik in 1957, and in 1961, they had the first astronaut, a guy called Yuri Gagarin, and he became the first man to orbit the Earth. Now, up to that point, the Americans believed technologically they were ahead of the rest of the world. But when Yuri Gagarin became the first Russian man to orbit the Earth, their confidence was shattered. They were asking, they were questioning their education system, their leadership, everything that has got to do with the future. Where do we stand compared to the Soviets? And it took someone like President John F. Kennedy, who understood the need to restore America's confidence and intended, and this is what he did, intended not merely to match the Soviets, but surpass them. So he went to Congress in the middle of 1961, and he stood before the Congress to deliver a message of urgent national need. And he asked for, I think, about $9 billion or close to $10 billion over 5 years for a space program, saying that by the end of the decade, not only will the country achieve the goal, but before the decade is out, which is 1969, landing a man on the moon and bringing him back safely to Earth. And I do not know whether you know this, but in 1969, last week was when man landed on the moon. Last week, I can't remember the exact date. Last week was when they landed. But John F. Kennedy gave a vision to the Americans. And even up to today, it's quite difficult to catch up on them on this vision. They have just grown leaps and bounds. I like to look at what NASA is doing, and I am really, sometimes I wish I could be working for NASA, doing some of the cool stuff that they are doing. All right? Yes, Gagarin, Yuri Gagarin, that's his name. Okay? But that is visioning. Do you have those qualities to create a vision for the people who follow you so that they follow you? A leader without a vision is like a leader leading the blind by the blind. You need to have a vision. All right? So that's vision. Let's go on to the next stage. What other qualities must you have as a leader? A leader must communicate a vision. So we have visioning, but you must also communicate a vision to an audience to get their commitment to achieve that vision. And when you are able to do that, you are doing what is known as sense giving. You're giving them that reality. That is sense giving. Right? Let me tell you a personal story. So all this time, I've been telling you stories about leaders. Now let's change tack and let me explain to you about my family. When my daughter was 15 years old, of course, now she's grown up, she's in her late 20s, she's running her own company, and she's very successful, doing very well. Not in Singapore, they're all overseas. I've got 2 daughters, but they're overseas, and they're doing extremely well. But my younger daughter, I always found her very interesting. I never allowed smartphones to them until they turned 15. So when she turned 15, she came to me and she said, Dad, I want a smartphone. And I said, okay, I'll get you a cheap smartphone, something that I have. She said, no, Dad, I'm not you. I'm different. I think different. So I need an Apple iPhone. I said, that's bloody expensive. She said, but that's what I need. I am different. So I bought it for her. She managed to convince me that she is different. But then again, what is Apple's vision? Anyone knows? What is Apple's vision? You're all business students. What is Apple's vision? No, that's not their vision. How can you change the world? That's not the vision. Apple's vision is, and I'll type it out. No, come on. Think different. That is Apple's vision. Apple's vision is to think different. If you have an Apple iPhone, people who own Apple iPhone, they think they are different, just like my daughter. That's what she convinced me. She is different. And because she is different, she needs to have an Apple iPhone. That is Apple's vision. And when Steve Jobs, when he went back to Apple, of course, he was fired from Apple, by a guy called John Scully, whom Steve Jobs brought into the company. But then this John Scully became CEO and fired Steve Jobs. And when Steve Jobs went back to Apple in 1997, he unleashed the think different vision to his employees. And he came up with the world's first viral advertisement. I do not know whether you saw that. You can Google it. The name is 1984. All right? 1984 is the title of a book written by an Englishman called George Orwell. He wrote it a long time ago in the 1930s, but there was a viral advertisement against IBM because IBM was a leader in computers at that time, 80s, 90s, before they sold it off to Lenovo. They were a leader in computers, but what Steve Jobs did was he gave this vision to his employees and he gave them that sense that we are different. A countercultural branding that pushed a mindset, not a product. If you're different, you should have an Apple product. They didn't say Apple product is different. They said you are different. And that's what set Apple apart from other companies. Now it's just like any other company. At that time, it made a difference. Okay? Everyone clear? So I've given you 3 leaders as change agents, and I'm giving you the qualities that sets them apart. Before I continue, I got another 4. Before I continue, anyone has got any questions? And then when I finish the last one, I'll ask you, do you have any questions? Anyone has any questions? Is it all very clear? Okay, let us continue. Somarita or Rita. Okay. So next one, another quality that a leader must have. You must communicate a shared sense of direction so that everybody involved could work together to achieve the vision. So now here we're talking about working together. How do you get everyone to work together? So this is known as aligning. Okay, so this is known as aligning. You're aligning what you do with the vision. So for example, Jack Welch, I think he has since passed away, but he was CEO of GE from 1981 to 2001. That's a long time. That's almost 20 years. He was one of the first CEOs to reward his executives with stock options for performance. Before that, it was unheard of. You perform well, I give you stock options. You can have a share in the company. He adopted Six Sigma. Six Sigma is a program of continuous improvement. He set up a set of processes in the company designed to continuously improve. He gave KPIs, he gave goals, he gave deadlines. This is what you have to do to achieve the vision. And GE became one of the most valuable companies in the world in the 1980s and 90s. Not so anymore, yeah? But in those days, it was one of the most valuable companies. I'm an engineer. I wanted to work in GE, and I nearly got the job. I passed, I cleared all the interviews, except the last interview, the guy was a little bit crazy, right? Asked me some dumb questions, and I got a little bit upset. And I said to myself, I'm not going to work with this guy, right? But that's aligning. Whatever is done, whatever you're doing is aligned with the vision. That is communicating a shared sense of direction, meaning that everyone is in the same boat. That's what it is. Next quality. As a leader, you must be able to identify and remove obstacles that gets in the way of change. And this is known as enabling. Granted, anytime you do anything, studying, doing assignments, working, there will always be obstacles. But if you're doing something to achieve a vision, these obstacles must be removed. Must be removed so that you can do the work. And a leader understands that. And one leader who understood this better than anybody else, you have to go back to World War II. As a military leader, Eisenhower, who ended up being the president of the United States, he was the president before John F. Kennedy, yeah? But he was the president after Truman and before John F. Kennedy. But as a military leader, Eisenhower never underestimated the importance of planning and preparation. He knew you have to plan, you have to prepare. You can't be doing things in the last minute. like most of us do. You have to be mentally prepared. You have to be physically prepared. But what does this entail when you say planning and preparation? You have to identify resources. You have to identify constraints. You have to identify deadlines, and so on. Now, his experience with war is really messy, chaotic. I did my national service in Singapore. I'm a Singaporean, but I did my national service. But I can tell you, I can in no way get involved in the army because I hate wars. I don't like wars. It affects people in many different ways. But Eisenhower was a career soldier. He never fought big battles. He was always a staff officer doing the planning. But he understood. And in planning, preparing for war, he knew that war is chaotic and unpredictable. And the way to victory was to be prepared for as many eventualities as possible. As a leader, you must know that. You know there would be all kinds of obstacles along the way. But if your vision is genuine, it helps others, it makes sense, then you should, in all your efforts, try to remove as many obstacles as possible in the way of your employees, or in the case of Eisenhower, in the way of soldiers, as much as possible. There was a movie I watched a long time ago, but unfortunately, a lot of these movies that I'm referring to, they're all old movies. And this was a movie called A Bridge Too Far. The Allied forces were trying to capture this bridge. But you would be surprised at the level of preparation that went on in capturing that bridge. A bridge which will bring them to Nazi Germany. But that's what happened. Okay? So enabling is one of the key qualities, one of many key qualities that a leader must have. All right? Let's go to the next one. Recognize and respond. Recognize and respond to the concerns of those affected by the change. This is what we would call supporting. Now, when change takes place, different people will be affected in different ways. I mean, you see a lot of things happening right now. You see, because of the pandemic, some people are affected in a much worse way than others. Some, okay, maybe people like me, maybe the restriction to freedom, maybe is something that bothered me during the pandemic. But when they lifted the restrictions, I just went back to my old ways. I took care of, took precautions against the spread of the virus, keep a safe distance, put on the mask. But I started doing things that I used to do 2 years ago. I traveled quite a bit for my work, and that's what I started doing. And this year alone, I've traveled a few times. I've traveled about 3-4 times. And that's what I do for a living. But when I look at people who are at the lower end of the economic strata, I really feel sorry for them. Some of them have lost their jobs. Some of them are mentally depressed. And then on the higher end, people who are well off, people who are managing companies, they don't give two hoots. They just look after themselves. So this is a problem that we are confronting right now. As a leader, you must recognize and respond to the concerns of those affected. You cannot keep silent and say, let it be. This is the way it is. I think that is a wrong attitude to take. There are a lot of people who are suffering, and leaders should step in to support them. An example, a good example, is Nelson Mandela. Okay, he's one of the most recent leaders I think, I admire a lot. Now, if you look at the history of Nelson Mandela, who was the first Black president of South Africa, he spent 27 years in prison. But his ability to unite all the different kinds of people in South Africa, and South Africa has got many different types of people. They have Asians, they have Blacks, they have whites, they have German speaking, English speaking. His ability to unite all these people and galvanize support for the abolishment of apartheid, even while he was in prison, shows that leadership can thrive without formal authority. He was in prison when he did all this. He had no formal position except that moral courage to tell people that they have to fight this discrimination. Now, that takes a lot of courage. And when I went to South Africa, I think this was after he died, yeah? I went to South Africa. I visited Robben's Island. His prison has been kept intact. His cell was very Spartan. There was nothing in the cell except maybe a blanket, maybe a pot. It's still kept as what it was. It's still there, Robben Island. And then anywhere I went, I was there for a project, yeah? But anywhere I went, whether it was to a restaurant talking to an Asian waiter or waitress, to a Black taxi driver or a white businessman, everyone I spoke to, who do you respect? And they always will say Nelson Mandela. Okay, again, there was a good movie made, a long, old movie, yeah? All right, about Nelson Mandela. It was made by Clint Eastwood. I'm trying to remember the name, but I forgot the name. It is about him. It is about him and about, the captain of the cricket team at that time. Or no, rugby team, sorry. It was about him and rugby, what he did. So when we talk about support, you're supporting the concerns of those affected by the change. And Nelson Mandela was able to do it. Okay, and people respect him for that. Even to this day, they said he is the best president they've ever had. A lot of others who came after him, they were only interested in power, they were only interested in getting rid of their enemies, political opponents. They want to stay in power. He encouraged democracy. He encouraged, when he was called to court to testify against something, he went to court. He didn't say, I'm the president, I don't have to go. He went. And when the judge came into the courthouse, now no one is above the law. He stood up for the judge because the judge represents justice. Now that is a great leader. Okay, he knows no one is above the law. But because of his actions, he inspired a lot of people. But during his tenure as a president, he supported everyone. People who were discriminated, even people who did this discrimination. That's why you found in South Africa, when he became president, there were no killings, there were no lynching, there was no camps, labor camps. There was none of those things. He recognized that. And what amazed me was when I went to Cape Town, I saw places, and this has been preserved, places where slaves were sold, people were imprisoned outside of a church. And his reason for keeping all those things and not to be ashamed of it is simply His point is, all these things that has come before us is what has made us. And we should be looking at those things, reflecting on them, both good and bad, to understand why we are here. Now, that's a great philosophy to have. But that's a supporting philosophy. How do you support people? All right? So recognize and respond to the concerns of those affected by the change. Supporting. Now let's come to the last one. The last one is demonstrate a continuing commitment to change and do whatever is necessary to keep others focused on implementing and sustaining change. And in brackets, this is what you have. Maintaining momentum and sustaining the change. All right? This is what it means. Maintaining momentum and sustaining the change. So you must be committed to change. You must give people a vision. You got to make sense, and then you got to give it to them. And whatever you do, the vision must be aligned to it. You must enable, get rid of obstacles, and you must support the people making the change. But change is not something you do it in a day. Sometimes it may take years, sometimes a few months, but usually it takes years. You must maintain the momentum and sustain the change. And this is what another US president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, did between 1933 and 1936. He took power, he became president when the US was in a very bad state. It was the time of the Great Depression. Great Depression meaning the stock markets tanked or crashed, and 30% of the US labor force were out of a job. There was no money, there was no food. And this is what he did. He came up with a series of programs, public projects, financial reforms, regulations, which came to be known as the New Deal. It responded, okay, so this New Deal responded to needs for relief, help people, reform, and recovery from the Great Depression. And this is what put the US on the road to recovery. In fact, after Abraham Lincoln, a lot of people say it is because of Roosevelt that the US came out of its doldrums. So he is considered one of the top three presidents. Yeah. So usually when you look at the top three presidents of the US, it's usually Abraham Lincoln. He's usually number one. George Washington, who founded the US, and Roosevelt, Delano Roosevelt, usually is the third. Why? He did all that to get out of the mess of the Great Depression. And a lot of the things he did, unfortunately, were dismantled by President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. And what he did in the 1980s gave rise to the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. Some of those things that Roosevelt instituted, some of them have been put back in place. But whatever he did, we are still living with it. What he did was what made the US a great superpower. Rules and regulations, the rule of law. This is what you have to do. Don't let companies become big. If they become big, dismantle them. But Reagan decided to remove some of these laws. And because of that, we are living in the same kind of period that happened before the Great Depression, the 1920s. In fact, there was a documentary last night. Okay, there was a documentary last night too about comparing the 1920s to what we are doing right now. So anything can happen. There are very so these are the qualities about leaders: sense making, visioning, sense giving, aligning, enabling, supporting, maintaining momentum, and sustaining the change. Has anyone got any questions on anything I have said? Questions, anyone? Anyone? Any questions? No? Ying Zhao, no questions? How about the rest? Or does Ying Zhao speak for everyone else? All clear? All right. Let us continue, right? We always listen to style of leadership. People always like to talk about style of leadership. Let's talk about style of leadership. And most of us, unfortunately, get taken in by styles of leadership. You can say there are three types of leadership, styles of leadership. One, you might call it transactional leadership. Transactional leadership. Focus on goal setting, direction, support, and reinforcement. So someone like Eisenhower would be a transactional leadership, as a transactional leader. But you have to be a little bit careful. Transactional leaders can be democratic, can also be autocratic. A democratic leader will try to influence you. An autocratic leader may threaten you. So you still achieve what is being done, but the approach, whether it's democratic or autocratic, can be different. All right? That's what transactional leadership is. Like Eisenhower is a transactional leader, but it was more of a democratic leader, right? While Stalin was a transactional leader, but he was more of an autocratic leader. Then you have charismatic leadership. Charismatic leaders highlight the power of emotional interaction between leaders and followers. So what you do, and if I may expand on this a little bit, you communicate in ways that inspire others. So communication is an important tool. But you also have to be able to frame the problem. So what framing is, so you have to, okay, you have to learn to frame, which is the ability to define the purpose. And this is known as framing. Can you frame the problem or the issue so that you define the purpose of the country or the purpose of the organization? And then what you then do is you use language to give emotional power to the message. So if you ask me, charismatic leaders, what skills do they have to have? They have to have the power to communicate, and they have to have the power to frame the purpose. So communication and framing are two skills that charismatic leaders must have. And this is what Obama, Barack Obama, the president before Trump, this is what he did. He was able to set agendas. He was able to frame what needs to be done. And he communicated in a way that inspired others. My, my business partner, he's a Republican, but he comes from a die-hard Republican family, and they live in a die-hard Republican state. Well, the place where they are in. And he mentioned Obama to me. He said he is a great communicator. And he is my business partner who's an American. He told me, he said, he's inspired reading his book, reading Obama's first book, listening to him speak. And only after he told me about it, I started watching Obama, not before that. Because he, being a Republican, he was motivated, he was inspired by what Obama said. Frame the issue the country is facing. Communicate to the Americans what needs to be done. And that kind of inspired my associate, my business partner. And we spoke about it. Right? That's charismatic leadership. Another leadership that is mentioned is distributed leadership. Okay. Distributed leadership. Okay, let me set this up. Okay, so it's distributed leadership. Maybe I'll break this up, yeah, so at least you're not confused. Okay, there are three different things. So a distributed leadership, it may not involve one person. Okay, so the initiator of change might be an individual or a group. All right. So in this case, this network of initiators, need to share a common vision of purpose that is clear, consistent, and inspiring. So that's distributed leadership. Now, people ask me this, people ask me, especially foreigners will always ask me, do you think Lee Kuan Yew is a great leader? You are a Singaporean, Morgan. Do you think he's a great leader? I said he was one of a team. A lot of people, give credit to Lee Kuan Yew to what Singapore is. I'm one of those few who don't, because during his time, there were a lot of initiators of change. It was a group of people, even though Lee Kuan Yew was a public face, there was this group of people, recognizable people to the older Singaporeans who inspired, who had a vision. And their vision was to make Singapore a developed country. That was their vision. This was what we were aiming for. These were people like, and you may not even have heard of them. Even Singaporeans don't remember them nowadays, except when they see buildings, when they see school, or maybe certain awards. We had Goh Chok Tong, not Goh Chok Tong, Goh Keng Swee. He's passed away. We had To Chin Chai. We had Lim Kim San. We had E.W. Barker. We had Rajaratnam. We had, who else? Trying to think, yeah? Ong Bang Poon. These were a group of people who brought Singapore forward. But Lee Kuan Yew was a public face of this group, and most people identified with him. And a lot of young people know him, but they do not know the rest, which is kind of a pity, yeah? It's a real pity, because these distributed leaders, they brought Singapore to become a developed country. All right? But that's where we are right now. And nowadays, I find a lot of leaders in our country, or maybe even outside of our country, I don't find many leaders who inspire me. A lot of the leaders I spoke about, they are from days gone by. A lot of them have passed on. They're not around with us anymore. Okay? But that's what they did. They made sense. They led us. They brought us to where we are right now. Unfortunately, the current breed of leaders have difficulty inspiring people like me. All right? Anyone has any questions before we take a break? Anyone? Any questions? Any questions, anyone? Not so far. New Kong. No questions. Well, we are going to take a break very soon. So you might as well ask me the questions right now before we take a break. After the break, we are going to look at a different topic. Okay, again on leadership, but looking at it from a different topic. Zhang Qi is all clear. How about the rest? The rest, let me just call out your names. Maybe I'll call those names, Fan Ti An Fong. You sound like a former student of mine. Any questions? Somarita. Where are you from, Rita? Anybody else? Yeah, most of you, I think most of you are from China. You're probably in China. So it's all very clear. Okay, let's take a break then. Okay, let's come back. It's now, well, it's almost, can we come back at, let's say, how long a break did Rosa used to give? Anyone? How long was her break? How long a break did Rosa give you? 20 minutes? Okay, let's take about 20 minutes. Okay, so 15 to 20. So let's say it's now about 4, almost 4:35. Let's come back at 4:55, right? So we come back at 4:55. All right, so I am going to switch off the mic and I'll see y'all a little bit later. I'm just going to get myself a drink. All right? Okay, so I'll see y'all a little bit later. Hello, everyone. Are we back from our break? Are we all back? Can I begin? Yes. Liu Gang, okay. Otsubo, Liu Shi, Bao Chi. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, before I start, I would just like to ask you this question. How many of you are in Singapore? Who is in Singapore right now rather than being overseas? Okay, so Liu Shi Cheng, you are in Singapore. Okay, the reason for me asking those questions, we have a face-to-face session on Friday morning at 8:30. Are you all coming? I don't like to come there and then there's nobody there. Okay, that's what I'm afraid of. I had that experience once. Okay, so most of you are coming. Okay, fine, great. I'm not saying it's wrong to come. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for me because there are also students overseas. So I have to talk to you, those who are in class, but I also have to make sure that the students who are overseas, they still benefit from the lecture. So it'll be a mix and match. So how is it going to play out? I'm not so sure. So just be patient with me. Yeah, those who are overseas, just be patient with me. That could be. Usually, I encounter some technical problems like what I experienced before I came in. I checked everything yesterday, and everything seemed to be well. And then when I came in this afternoon, I had some problems. So I may expect a problem like that on Friday. I hope not, but you never know. You just prepare for the worst. Okay, so at least a few of you are coming, and which is great. I actually like to see students, yeah, face to face. Okay, let us begin. So when you are a leader, you work with others, you work with people, and because of that, okay, let me just correct this. Okay, so because of that, we talk about the collective nature of leadership. Okay, you work with others. So collective nature of leadership. Now, this collective nature of leadership can be impacted by a few things. Basically, two things. One is known as, we call it coherence. Coherence requires the bringing together the range of skills and experience to what we might call formulate an acceptable vision. It's not an easy thing to do, right? Like, for example, I do projects. I work on projects with my team members. Usually there are about 6 of us, half a dozen of us. But I bring in these people together to make sure that we achieve something. And that here we call it a vision, which is long term, but if it is something of a short term, you call it an objective. So we are trying to achieve some objectives. But in achieving all these objectives, you hope to work towards a vision. But that in itself is a coherence. But in trying to create this vision, you must also have the ability to influence others in a legitimate manner. That means you're not threatening people. You're trying to convince them. You're trying to get the right group of people to do things in a certain manner. So you need to learn to influence people by way of communication. Do not think threatening people or do as I tell you, that kind of an approach, I'm the boss, will work. Maybe it will work for a short time, but it will not work in the long run. I had a discussion with a managing director of a company in Singapore. It's an American company. And this managing director was replacing another manager. Okay, he went back to the US and he was telling me, he said, when he took over, the company was in a terrible state. People were doing their own stuff, people were late, quality standards were not met. And I said, what do you think is the cause of that? He said, before, the previous managing director, he said, took a very autocratic approach. This is how I do it. This is what I want you to do. If you don't do it this way, you'll be fired. That kind of an approach. But it doesn't work. People may do those things in the short term, but when he leaves, everyone reverts back to a bad behavior. And this is what this manager is experiencing. When you put people under pressure, when you are autocratic towards them, sooner or later something will explode. And I saw this in Indonesia, I saw this in South Korea when they were previously under a dictatorship. In South Korea, I saw it under the former dictator, Roh Tae-woo. Students were protesting and the country just fell apart. I was working there when it happened. In Indonesia, it happened under Suharto. When Suharto was ruling Indonesia under an autocratic leadership, yes, there was economic growth, but people were not happy. And then in 1998, it exploded. Suharto was overthrown and the country was in very bad state. I was there when it happened. Okay, I was there when it happened and I was just so, how would I put it? I was worried. Will the country get out of it or not? But the current president has done a lot to make sure that the country is in the right course. And I was talking to some friends of mine recently from Indonesia. I asked them, I said, do you think the country, well, Jokowi, the current president, whose term was going to end very soon, I think they'll start, canvassing or campaigning, next year for the new president. His term is going to end very soon. And I said, do you think, it will go back to Suharto's time? And a lot of these friends, they say they don't think so. And I said, look at Myanmar, what happened? The military came into power. They say they don't think it will happen in Indonesia. People have had a taste of freedom, of democracy, and there are a lot of entrenched powers to do that. And this is the thing about change. When change takes place, it is difficult to go back to the old ways. So when we talk about change, we are also talking about what is known as fragility. Fragility refers to three types of coupling if you want to make a change. The first type of coupling is known as strategic coupling. Strategic coupling is internal harmony between members of the leadership. Remember, it's collective leadership. One person may be the public face, but this collective leadership means that there are a lot of capable people working with this public face, for example, like Lee Kuan Yew, to bring the country forward. If there's internal harmony between members of the leadership, then it is good. If there's no internal harmony, then there are problems. All right? So that is what fragility means. And when I look at the Indonesian leadership, what Mr. Jokowi is doing is is trying to create this internal harmony. If he sees anyone getting out of line, he gets rid of them and brings in someone who will not work for themselves. Then you have B, what we call organizational coupling. Organizational coupling starts with a question. Is there an alignment between the objectives of the leaders as reflected by their behavior and the interests of the constituents? Because why are we worried about this? Because leaders rule. Whether you are a politician or whether you are a business leader, you rule in part by the consent of those you lead, your followers. If your followers don't want to follow you, you as a leader, there's nothing much you can do. You're not a dictator. We're not worried about dictators. We're worried about working in a democratic institution. And all companies tend to be democratic. If you're not happy, you can leave. No one is stopping you from leaving. So this is organizational coupling. And again, let me share a story about Mr. Jokowi in Indonesia, because I was there very recently. I just came back last week. I was asking my host, I said, do you think Jokowi behaves like an arrogant leader? I tend to play the devil's advocate. Sometimes I say things, more to get people's answers. So he said, no, I don't think Jokowi is arrogant. And he gave me one example. Let's say he has got a motorcade. A motorcade means he's in the car and you have the traffic police, with their sirens, leading the way. In most countries that I go to, what do? The traffic police would have their sirens on. They have all these beepers on. So people are supposed to get out of the way. If you don't, you get arrested. Most countries I've seen, almost all countries. But this host told me in Indonesia, that does not happen with the president. He said his ministers will do it, but they don't respect their ministers very much. But they respect the president. Why? Because the traffic police will ride ahead and tell the drivers of cars or vehicles in front, please, can you please move aside? The president is on his way. And they told me that he does this all the time, whether going to the airport or going for meetings, going to meet other heads of state. And most people, in fact, all people, they said because it's Jokowi and they respect him, they give way. And they said for the others, they don't, which is kind of an interesting comment made by my host in Indonesia. Makes me think twice here about what our leaders in Singapore, they do. But that's organizational coupling. Is there an alignment between what the leaders' objectives are, as shown by their behavior, and what the people on the ground, what their interest is? Third one is environmental coupling. Okay, I spelled this wrongly, environmental coupling. Now, leadership can unravel if you are not connected to the environment. For example, you're running a business, and this happened to Jack Ma in China. He went against the government or its central bank, what banking should be doing. And what happened to him? He was called up and given a warning. So leadership constellations can break down if they become detached from their environment. Okay, like what I said with Jack Ma, demands and constraints imposed by the Chinese Communist Party. And if you start questioning the leaders in power, now your position may be quite tenuous, may not be permanent. All right? When you start becoming detached from the environment, which what has happened with Jack Ma, that performance begins to decline. And the Chinese Communist Party has not relented on coming down hard on some of these tech companies, because the leadership in those tech companies have failed to realize who calls the shots. And the same is true in companies. You are a CEO. You are there under the blessing of the board of directors. The board of directors are there under the blessing of the shareholders. Now, if your shareholders are very powerful, big companies, fund managers, and if you go against what they say, you can be out of a job. In a public listed company, this is how companies work. All right? So it doesn't mean when you list a company, you're safe, you make lots of money. You still have to appease your shareholders. So remember this. So you need to have internal harmony. You need to make sure whatever your objectives are, the people under you, interests are taken care of. But looking outside of the company, you also need to look outside to the environment to see that your performance is not affected. So as a leader, what then can you do in trying to make a change? Let's look at that. Now, there is a case, I mentioned this case in the study guide. I'll write it down. You can go and look for it. It's easily available on Google. A lot of the cases that I post is easily available on Google, but if you can't find it, go to UCD's library and download it, which is the role of leadership. But what I'm talking about, this article is, this is known as Kotter's, I'll write it in bold, yeah? Kotter's 8 steps of change. So what Kotter is interested in exploring is, and I'm just going to summarize what he said, he is looking at what is the role of leadership in the change management process. It's an interesting article. I have it right in front of me, and I am going to just summarize that article. So one of the first points that Kotter mentions is, he said, a leader must create a climate for change. You have to, when I was bringing my daughters up, I was always telling them, I said, look around you, what is happening around you? Don't be so self-absorbed, thinking that you are the most important, the things you do, the things you wear, the music you listen, they're not the most important. Look around you, look at what is happening around you. Forget about the phone, don't look at the phone and walk. Put the phone away. create a climate for change. Because when you look around you, you see the changes taking place. All right? But don't promise them the world. Don't do that. Don't tell them you can become anything you want. Your dreams will all come true. Those are rubbish advice. Look around you and see whether you're relevant to all the changes that is happening around you. You're telling the people who are following you, be careful. Don't make unrealistic assessment of the environment or even the constraints. Some people say cannot be done. I said, are you sure? Have you looked at the details? So be aware. Okay, be aware of making unrealistic assessment of opportunities and constraints. You have to evaluate. When I go to a restaurant, I wouldn't be looking at the phone. I'll be looking around me. I'm looking around me, looking at how often the tables turn over, meaning people coming in and people leaving. Depends on the services, depend on the food. All right? Look at the prices. You don't choose the cheapest or the most expensive trying to impress your date. You look at the quality of the food. Try it. If I go to a restaurant and the food tastes like shit, I don't go back there again. But if the food is good, I enjoy going. Like tonight, I told my wife, let's meet for dinner. I finished my class around 6 o'clock. I can meet you for dinner about 7:30. She said, okay. But we go to nice restaurants, enjoy the food, enjoy the environment. Not spend time on the phone looking at the screen. The whole world is much bigger than that small screen. When you understand what's happening around you, you then can formulate vision in a way that addresses the needs and concerns of key stakeholders. You have to know this. But that only happens when you are aware of what's happening around you. You have to create a climate for change. Engage. This is the other thing that Cotter mentions in his article. Engage and enable the whole organization. We are talking about organization because that is our focus of concern. Engage and enable the whole organization. A good leader influences, convinces everyone in the organization. Do not change your talk. Do not distort your vision so that some people are happy. Don't do that. We call that two-faced. Or you're behaving like a snake, forked tongue. A snake has got a forked tongue. That means you can talk in two different ways. You don't want to do that. All right? Do not distort the vision. All right? Why? To make it more appealing to key stakeholders. You don't want to do this. So the first one is you have to create a climate for change. The second one is you have to make sure that you do not distort the vision. and make it more appealing to certain people. You have to make sure that you influence or convince others. Some people may be reluctant, that always happens. But your job as a leader is to convince them. Have the courage of your convictions that this will happen. That's what you should do. And once you're doing this and you're on your way to change, brings us to the third part, which is implementing and sustaining the change. So when you implement and sustain the change, you have to look at a few things. All right? What you have to do is don't focus too much attention on individuals. You should be looking at the whole situation. Situational factors and the ability to inspire, to transform an organization is much more important. So this is where you can say charismatic leadership is useful. Right? Look at the situational factors and then inspire those people who are to change. This is where you have to use your charisma. All right? Move away. A lot of people are caught up in organizational structures, traditional command and control structures. Move from functional or command and control structures to a more process-oriented organizational form. So we are talking about collective leadership. All right? This is what you have to do. You delegate. You tell people what to do and ask them to report back to you what is being done. But this is implementing and sustaining change. All right? Now I have one last part. Now we are going to go into the details. But before I do that, and the last part will take us to the end of the lesson. But before I talk about that, anyone has any questions on anything I have said so far? Anyone? Any question? Jali, Zhang Boyan, Ying Zhao, Liu Shi Cheng, Zhao Ye Nan. Anyone has any questions? All no questions. All right. I have a question for you, which will bring us to the last part of today's lesson. Who, I'll type it out in the chat bubble, who should you appoint as a change manager or a change agent? Who should you appoint? This is what we call appointing what we call a transition manager, a change agent, someone who is helping to make the change. So who should you appoint? We've talked about leadership. Now we are looking at the tactical approaches that we have to bear in mind. Anyone, any ideas? Who should you appoint as a change manager? Anyone? No ideas? Based on what you have learned from Rosa, who should you appoint as a change manager? Now, there may be several people that you can consider for this transition manager's role. You can appoint a senior manager, right? If you look at Joe Biden, okay, yes, I mean, that's what Yang Long is saying. C-level means corporate level, but not necessarily. If you look at Joe Biden, when it came to climate, he appointed John Kerry. John Kerry was a senator. He was also a presidential candidate. He was also Obama's foreign secretary, one of the second most powerful position in the US. So he's had a lot of experience. He is a senior position. So you can appoint a senior person in the organization to take control. But it is not necessary. You can appoint a project manager. I get involved in this kind of job, but I come from outside, not even within the company. A project manager may be appointed on a temporary basis. Okay, that is a possibility. But it could also be someone in middle management who may be given responsibility for the transition in addition to their current role. That is also a possibility. Or you can have a team, a task force. You hear about that. In Singapore, they always talk about the task force. Recently, I think yesterday's newspaper, they say they are creating a task force to explore the needs, requirements of the youth in Singapore. All right? I do not know what they're going to do. Look for jobs for them or what? I really do not know, because that was not clearly explained in the article. But it can also represent a group of people from the different constituencies affected by the change. Let's say if you're changing, let's say a company in, I don't know, in Singapore. So you invite people from HR, you invite people from marketing, operations, all these different departments affected by the change. And then you see whether they can institute the change. So there are many different. In managing the transition, they must have, in managing the transition, the manager or the team tasked to make the change, they have to have the following qualities. Okay? Must have the following qualities. Now, what are these qualities? I'll move everything to the next page, yeah? So we can start on something new. One quality is, we call it cloud. What is cloud? Cloud means a certain power, a certain drive. And you need cloud to get things done, okay? To mobilize resources, to mobilize resources necessary to keep the change moving. You need cloud. Okay, in situations where resources are scarce. Now, those responsible for keeping the old system, now they may resist giving up their time and the resources required to develop the new system. But if the team or the person tasked to become the transition manager or change manager, if they have cloud, they can get it done. So the transition manager or team must have power and authority to ensure that resources are allocated as required. This is what cloud means. Okay, maybe I'll put a number to that, yeah? Right? Looks better. The second thing is people must respect them, yeah? Whoever you are, if you're undertaking a change, there must be respect. Respect of, you can say, of the existing leadership and those working on the development of a new system, making the change. So you need this. You need this kind of respect. People must respect what is being done. And the third one that the manager or the team needs is what I call ability. I know it's a simple word, but it is very much lacking in industry. There are people I've met who come with master's degree, who come with PhDs, and they cannot get the job done. Ability means to get things done in ways that will win support and commitment rather than resistance and compliance. People comply because you threaten them. That's why people comply, and you don't want that. Ability is to influence, to tell them this is the way it is. Okay? So this is what you have to think of. Understand? Any questions on this before I come to the last part? Anyone, any questions on cloud, respect, and ability that a transition manager or a change manager or a change agent or team must have? Any questions, anyone, before I come to the last one? No? No one has any questions? Everything is clear? Okay. Let me go to the next stage. Now, there are situational variables that a transition manager must also observe. Remember looking at the environment. So situational variables that the change, I like to use the change agent term, because it can refer to a person or it can refer to a team, transition team or manager. Okay, situational variables that the change agent must be aware of to influence the change process. And what are these situational variables that I am talking about? First, urgency and stakes involved. The greater the short-run risk to the organization. If the current situation does not change quickly, the more change managers have to adopt maybe what is known as a directive strategy. Right? Involvement and participation take time, and this might not be available if the need for change is urgent. Right? So involvement and participation take time. Remember this. And if this is the case, time may not be available if the need for change is urgent. So remember this. This is an environmental or situational variable. This is why I always emphasize look around you. A lot of people are oblivious to what is happening around you. It is good to be skeptical, to question, to ask questions. If someone does things in a certain way, ask yourself, is this the right way? Or why should it be done this way? Don't accept things as they are. We're all human, you, me, everyone. Lee Kuan Yew, everyone. Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi, Joe Biden, all of us are human. We can make mistakes, but to hold them accountable, we have to ask questions. Urgency and stakes involved. Number two, think about clarity of desired future state. Remember, this is the vision. Is it clear? Right? So it may be difficult to anticipate, what a more desirable future state would look like for all of us. If I ask you, you're doing certain things right now, you're taking a master's program. If I ask you why, what would your answer be? What would your answer be? Why are you taking a master's program? Anyone? Yang Long? Jia Li? Zhao Yinan, Liu Shicheng, why are you taking a master's program? You're planning for your future state. Hopefully it's a desirable future state. Well, Yang Long is looking for a higher salary. Piao is looking to move into a future direction, but a higher salary, you don't need a master's degree, Yang Long. You don't have to. Be clear, you're looking at a desirable future state. You're taking up a program which will give you an overview on how organizations are conducted. That's what you are trying to do. If you want to make more money, you don't have to take a master's program. You don't have to. Yeah, but what is a better future? For me, a better future is, I keep telling my daughters, please give me grandchildren. I want to play with my grandchildren. I think being a granddaddy is pretty cool. My daughters are married, but they don't want to have kids. That's for me a desirable future state. I want to play with grandchildren. So for different people, it is different desired states. But as a leader, a transition manager, you must know what people are looking for. If everyone is looking for a higher salary, and if you say, okay, I'll work towards your higher salary in an organization, the organization would just die out. How do you get higher salaries? You make good products. You provide excellent services. You are good in what you do. And that's what you are doing. You are learning things which not many people will learn. Managing of change. All right? Well, a master's program doesn't give you more options. The higher your education, the more narrow your focus becomes. Zhao Yinan, you have a lot of options when you only do high school because you're covering many areas. If you do a master's, if you do a PhD, it narrows your option. Remember that. Okay? A master's degree doesn't offer you more options. It gives you an overview of management. That's what it does. But that narrows your options. You're not going to end up as a project manager if you have a master's degree, but you may end up in middle management, which gives you an overview of the things to do. All right? And then it's up to you to convince senior managers that you can do your job. Mind you, I've been through this trip a few times in at least about 3 companies. I've been through all this. And I'm sharing with you my experience, my expertise, what it takes. Like I said, there are a lot of people out there who do not know what to do, what to expect. And then when you give them the responsibilities, they do not know how to carry it out. Okay? So these are things, right? So what you have to do is you have to, as a change manager, must seek inputs and feedback from others and adopt a more collaborative approach. That's what you have to do as a change manager. Talk to people, discuss, listen to what others are saying, and then try to put all of them together and see what you can achieve. All right? A collaborative approach in coming up with a vision, a desired future state. Now, whatever it is, there will always be resistance from people who do not like change. A lot of us don't like change, right? Even nowadays, why has education enrollments gone up? Because the parents of a lot of us tell us, you have a degree, it's easy to get a job. I mean, is that really true? So when these people get a degree, they can't find a job. What happens? There's a lot of resistance to all kind of change. So a third thing you have to worry about is the amount and type of resistance that is to be anticipated. What kind of resistance are you anticipating? All right. The sad truth is the greater the anticipated resistance, the more change manager have to persuade others to accept the need for change. The more you have to influence people, the more you have to talk to people. And this, when you start doing it, you cannot be a dictator. You can't take a directive approach. This might require a more collaborative approach towards implementation of change. All right, now when you make a change, now people will ask you questions like, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Do you have the information? Do you have the data? So in this case, it's number 4. When you make the change, do you know what needs to be done? The extent to which change managers have the required data for designing and implementing the change. All right? And the more change managers anticipate that they will need information from others to help design and implement the change, the more they will have to adopt a collaborative approach. So if you think you need a lot of information, so the more it is anticipated that the change requires more information to help design and implement the change. A collaborative approach is needed. So you have to think along these lines. All right? That is number 4. I think I missed out. Yeah, let me just put this in. All right? That is number 4. We have 2 more, and then we are done. And then after that, I'll open the floor to questions if you have any questions. Number 5. Number 5 is degree to which other stakeholders trust change management. managers? Do they trust you? Or are you two-faced? Are you twin-forked? You know, those words which I used earlier. You say one thing and you do another thing. The more the trust, the more likely they are prepared to follow the change. The more the trust, the more likely they are prepared to follow the change. If they don't trust you, you have problems. So the lower the level, change managers may have to involve others in order to win their trust and build commitment. The key thing here is change managers must build commitment from others to their change. And if you don't have the trust, it is going to be extremely difficult. Okay? And the last one is number 6. Last one is degree to which change managers have to rely on commitment and energy of others to implement the plan. Okay? Because people will engage in certain behaviors to make the change plan work. And to make the change plan work, all right, you have to convince, you have to take what is known as, again, a collaborative approach. So adopt a collaborative approach and involve others in the change process so that people will engage in what I call discretionary, whether they want to do or not, discretionary behaviors to make the change. And if you don't get them involved, they may not want to change. They might just say, forget this, it's a complete waste of time. I've been the subject of change in some of the big companies I worked for. I worked for 3 MNCs, one before going to university, 2 after I left university, the first 2 companies. And then I decided to go and do things on my own because I was not very happy with the way they are going about doing things. These are big MNCs. They didn't get me involved in anything they did. I was just a cog in the wheel. I'm just supposed to do certain tasks. That's all. So I gave up and I said, I want to set up my own company. And my friend encouraged me. My business partner, that American friend of mine. So he encouraged me and we decided to do something together. And we are still doing it. And we've been doing it for the last 20 years. And we've been, I think, reasonably successful, even good times and bad times. And I've seen in big companies, do not think that big companies know what they're doing. Most of them do not know what they're doing because they're so big. They do not know what everyone is doing. They talk about strategies all the time. But I always tell people, amateurs talk about strategies. Professionals talk about operations, how the thing gets done. And that's how it should be. Okay? I've come to the end. Anyone has any questions? Anyone has any questions on anything I have spoken about so far? Come to the end of today's lesson. You have about, 15 minutes to ask me questions? I mean, is it that clear? Liu Shi Cheng? You must have some questions. No questions? All okay? Okay, some last points here, and these are things I have seen. A lot of us get caught up in the things we do. There are people who feel that, they are a boss, people should follow what they have to say. That is the viewpoint of an autocratic manager. Don't be an autocratic manager. The autocratic manager believes that the only approach is to coerce or threaten people. That's the way to get things done. But then on the other extreme, you have the people-oriented manager. Okay? A people-oriented manager is someone who likes to be supporting people all the time, trying to involve people all the time. That doesn't work too. People will take advantage of. So don't be an autocrat. Don't be a very sociable person. You can't have. It has to be somewhere in between. But then there are managers who like to manipulate others, thinking that no one knows what they're doing. You are wrong. People are smarter than you think they are. So don't try to manipulate people. Those are the cynical managers. And then there are others, and I hope you have not fallen into the trap. And I see a lot of them nowadays. I have a degree. I have a degree from Harvard. I know what I'm doing. They rely so much on education as an influence strategy. I know what I'm talking because I graduated from Harvard or I graduated from Princeton. And I've come across this kind of managers too, who do not have a clue on what needs to be done. And then you have the lawyer type of managers. And what do? They like to bargain. They like to trade off. You do this for me, I do that for you. That's not how it works. A change manager have to mix and match a lot of things, but you have to be charismatic. It's not easy. You have to learn to communicate. You better be prepared, collect as much data as possible, and then try to convince people that this is the way to go. For those reasons, I don't like to work in big companies. I always like to work in small companies. And my eldest daughter, when she graduated, she graduated from a university in the US. She studied animation. And the last year of her program, she had 3 job offers. The 3 job offers being from Microsoft, from Google, and one small company. I don't even know the name of that company. And she asked me for advice, Dad, which company should I choose? And I told her, I said, take the small company. She was surprised. She was in fact shocked. She thought I will recommend the company which pays her the highest salary, which was Google. Second was Microsoft. The small company paid the lowest. But I said, go for the small company because that's when you learn everything. You will be doing everything, HR, marketing, operations, and which is what she did. She went to the small company and she worked there for 2-3 years. And then the company went bankrupt. But guess what happened? Because of her experience, her all-rounded nature, she was headhunted by 2 big companies. She worked for them, one of them. She didn't like the big company atmosphere. And then 2 years ago, she approached me and she said she wants to run her own company. And I said, all the power to her. I said, go ahead and do it. Because she's good in her job, her client, one of a major client, is Amazon. And she's working in Seattle, contracting herself to Amazon and making a lot more money than she ever imagined. So do not think, and she's only got one degree, an animation degree, an undergraduate program. And that's all you need to make lots of money. Okay? So learn how things work in real life. Go and investigate. Ask me questions. I have enough experience to inform you. I could be wrong at times, but you can always challenge me. And I'll give you reasons why I think in certain ways, because of the experience I've had working in different companies. And also because I'm running my own company right now. Okay? I've said enough. We have another lesson tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. Last minute questions, anyone? Before we say our goodbyes? I guess not. Owen wants to digest. Zhao, I do not know what's cool. Is MOC cool? I think so. I think it is a very cool subject. And I teach it, so I must be a cool person. Thank you, Zhao. So, take care of yourself. Okay, all this, yeah? Don't worry about this, Jason. After this week, we have 3 lessons this week. After all the 3 lessons are complete, I will upload all this onto the Brightspace. Now, those who have trouble accessing the Brightspace, let your program manager know, and I'll send it to them, and they can send it to you. Okay? So wait till this weekend, and I'll upload today's lesson, tomorrow's lesson, and Friday's lesson over the weekend. Until tomorrow, take care of yourself. Have a good dinner. I think I'll take a shower, get dressed, and go and meet my wife for dinner. And I hope she pays for my dinner. All right. See you tomorrow, everyone. Take care. Bye for now.